This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Steve here on Beyond the Big Screen. I am joined by our old pals, Frank and Mustache Chris. And Mustache Chris generously wants to give Frank and I nicknames, but we need your help to come up with nicknames. So if you have ideas for nicknames for us, hopefully it's something we can say on the air. But
well, why don't we help them out a little bit, Chris? Steve, and tell them a couple of things they could play off of, like you're the beekeeper, right?
Yeah, maybe just the beekeeper. I do kind of have a Jason Statham look to me. So,
and you're a teacher.
Yes, and Frank's a cop and a crime writer. So we'll let your imaginations out there go wild.
Actually, right under 3 different pen names, maybe I should be triple threat.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I just think of this right off the top of my head. We were doing True Detective, and I don't know how we never even mentioned the fact that you're a retired cop and a crime writer, and then Marty's pretending that he's researching for crime novels, and he's a retired cop, and it was like I never even made
true crime. He was going to do true crime, but yeah.
In today's episode, we are going to dive into our least favorite remakes, the remakes that we think just completely missed. In the previous episode, we talked about our favorite remakes, so you should definitely go back and check that one out. But today we're going to really dig deep into these remakes that just completely imploded. Now, so let's dive right in. Frank, what is your worst remake?
Well, I'm going to give honorable mention to one, and I'm not counting the 2 that you guys are picking. But I got to say that the Mark Wahlberg Planet of the Apes was a real mixed bag, and there was a lot of good things. The makeup was good. Paul Giamatti was good. Tim Burton was good. Everybody was pretty good except for Mark Wahlberg, who I think is good in a lot of the stuff that he's been in. I mean, he was great in The Departed and several other things. He can do comedy and drama. I'm not saying he's a bad actor at all, but he kind of wasn't very good in that. And then the twist ending that made 0 sense. It was like, just for this. I mean, somebody in the comments explained that to me. I mean, I understand that it's, riffing on the original ending, but it makes 0 sense to me how that, I don't get it. I just don't even get it. So that's the honorable mention. And it's honorable mention because it didn't touch the suckage that was the remake of a film that we covered on this channel with great adoration and love, Total Recall. So Total Recall was a 1987, 86, 87 movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everybody probably knows this. It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story called, or was it a novel? Was it full-length novel? Do you remember, Steve?
It's a short story.
Yeah,
short story, right?
Yeah, that one was a short story.
We'll remember it for you wholesale. And I mean, it's very well known, very quintessential science fiction, very Arnie, great campy lines. That's a great movie. And it has a cool story. And, the thing we talked about a lot was the question of, was it a dream or not a dream, and the way that they shot it, there was room to argue both sides. It was done well enough for that, and have an opinion. There's room to argue the other direction. And then 2012, I think they remade it with Colin Farrell, who I really like as an actor. I think he's fantastic. And even in movies that haven't been very good, I thought he was good in them. But this movie was just horrible. And who's the female that's in this? I didn't even look who the female lead is. She's a gorgeous woman, but just, again, terrible role. Neither one of them. It was the writing and the directing, I think, that sucked in this movie. But it wasn't even really a remake. I mean, they had some things from the first movie, the Mind Scrambler going on and all that kind of stuff, but it was really a completely different plot line. Didn't capture any of the magic of the first movie, because that was all about the mystery of it. Is he really a secret agent? Is he dreaming? Is this real? What's going on Mars? This was all very compelling mystery, and it's just a super blah. It's almost like a corporate made movie. It's so blah, bland, and there's none of the satisfaction from the way that the first movie ran. And so I guess I take I mentioned in another episode when we talked about the best remakes, what makes a good remake, and it's that it captures the soul of the first movie, the story and the characters and whatever made it special, and then hangs on to that, but looks at it through the viewpoint of the time in which the remake is made, and maybe puts a little bit of its own spin on it. For instance, I chose True Grit as mine, and I liked the fact that the main character was that Jeff Bridges played, Rooster Cogburn, was far more pathetic, far grittier, far more irascible than the John Wayne version of it. But he wasn't radically different. He was more Rooster Cogburn, if anything, right? And that was the twist or the spin that the modern filmmaker made on it. They didn't do that in Total Recall. They didn't take any of what made the first movie great, not the story, not the question of reality, which is a huge thing in Philip K. Dick's novels. And even if all you've ever done is see the movies made from those, the idea of consciousness and reality and time and, all of these, sci-fi, approaches to these topics were the things that his stories and the adaptations are based upon. And this was just kind of a straightforward, sucky B sci-fi movie that you could have called it something else, and somebody would have, if they hadn't have called this Total Recall, they had called it, whatever, and put it out, there would have been a few people that would have said, oh, you know what? They put him in this like head scrambler thing that was kind of like Total Recall. And that would have been the only connection anybody would have made between the two movies. And so I don't even get why it was a remake. It just doesn't even make sense to me. So that's my case for Total Recall being the worst remake ever.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Scott Rank's History Unplugged podcast and other great podcasts. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors. All right, so I'm going to jump in with my worst remake ever, and it carries on to a theme that was my theme for movies with the remakes and from the best remakes, and it was remaking the impossible. And this is the 2015 remake of Point Break, based on the 1991 Point Break. Now, for the 1991 Point Break, I mean, I'm going to stand here and say that I said that 1974 Death Wish was one of my top 3 movies. I think that Point Break is one of my top 3 movies as well, because it hits every single note that a movie should make. And I watched the 1991 version. I watched it in preparation for this program. And I think that besides a few cars and a little bit of a couple of things that maybe wouldn't exactly pass muster today, politically correct wise, that movie could have been set in 2024 and would have worked perfectly. And I think I could have watched it. I didn't watch it with my daughter, but I don't think she would have had any problem with it being dated in any way, except for a couple of items. I think that every single point that the first one made and did so spectacularly, the second one failed at every single point. I mean, just to bring up a couple of items, the whole conflict and drama of the story gets completely removed. So both characters are named Johnny Utah, and Keanu Reeves plays Johnny Utah in the 1991 version. It makes perfect sense why he's an FBI agent. He was a football star. His knee gets nuked in a bowl game. So everybody in the country who has any interest in college football knows Johnny Utah. And I believe it was in the Rose Bowl. His knee gets nuked. He went to law school and became a FBI agent. That's a normal progression. You don't have to suspend disbelief or anything for that progression. In the remake, there's a 20-minute long, or at least it feels like it's about a 3-hour long extreme motocross off-roading montage scene. And Johnny Utah's doing it with his partner, and his partner misses this jump that Johnny Utah makes and he dies. And that's the reason why he becomes an FBI agent for some reason. Even though he was a high school dropout, cutscene 7 years later, he's in Quantico becoming an FBI agent. And he was just like, when my friend died, I had to become an FBI agent. Not that you had to go back, get a GED of some sort, go to 4 years of college, go to some sort of graduate school, and then become an FBI agent. I think you might even have to work to some degree before you become an FBI agent.
Technically, you can become an agent out of college, but they tend to recruit college degree working law enforcement. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if you suspend disbelief that he was, that aspect of it, that's still a lot of disbelief to suspend. So you're working with that right off the bat. And then to tie back to Frank and Chris's True Detective, Johnny Utah in the 2015 is still a recruit in Quantico in his FBI training. Johnny Utah in the 1991 version is on his first deployment or his first action. So he's actually a fully bonded and certified FBI agent, and he's brash and young and gets teamed up with the old grizzled veteran. So you get that kind of conflict. They miss entirely on the 2015 version when Johnny Utah is teamed up with a British FBI agent who isn't even in the US, which I'm sure that maybe happens, but you didn't buy it in any way whatsoever that this is a natural fit. They essentially hate each other. There's none of that conflict of the young buck versus the veteran, and eventually they come to symbiosis, and the veteran gets his groove back and the young kid gets some some veteran qualities to him. You don't get any of that in the second one. Really, the whole second one is just all about extreme sports. It's just one extreme sport thing after another. They do an extreme parachuting. They do an extreme rock climb. And there is some story to it. But the thing that the story misses is in the first one, Bodhi, played by Patrick Swayze, which I think Patrick Swayze played that masterfully, because in 1991, that was really not a role that he would have done as like the hippie kind of surfer dude. And he blows you away. You don't even think of him as the classic Patrick Swayze in that character. He really is about finding some sort of nirvana through surfing, and they rob banks, small time bank robbing. They're not doing these big heists just so they can surf the endless summer. Like, they're surfer dudes who want to be cool and surf the endless summer. Where in the second one, they're trying to beat this 7 impossible challenge, and the damage that they do to the earth makes them have to repay it by doing these gigantic bank robberies that then they give back to the people. And it's like, what are you doing? And I think that the actor who played Bodhi in the second one, Edgar Rodriguez or Edgar Ramirez, he could have done it. And there's some points in the movie where you're kind of buying into him being this sort of spiritual character he played it much darker than Patrick Swayze did. But it was any time that it felt like, yeah, I'm really getting into this, it just imploded and they do something stupid. And then the ultimate scene at the end is in both movies is that Bodhi's going to surf this 50-year wave. And in the first one, there's the drama because you don't know, is Johnny Utah, he's there to arrest him and bring him in for his crimes. Sort of the same thing is set up with an extreme action-packed like fight scene, and then he just lets him go. But there's like no drama at the end. For a kind of a cheesy late 80s, early 90s action scene, you're almost kind of in tears at the end of the 1991 version, where in the end it's of the second one, you're just like, thank goodness this is over. I really pushed myself because I wanted to get back some of that feeling with a modern view. And I think that it just missed in every possible way. I mean, I'm not even getting into the love story. I think one of the things that this movie, why it might have missed, it had a very and I think it was made by it was a joint venture between a German European film company and a Chinese film company. And if you ever watched The Meg and The Meg Part 2, and there's a couple other, Jason Statham is in a lot of these movies where there's not a lot of really like high drama action, but they go to a million really cool locales. They go to Monaco, then they'll jump and they'll be in Thailand, and then they'll be in, some like crazy forest and beautiful forest in China. Then they're at the South Pole. I think that's what the movie was going for more than to make like a really deep remake of Point Break. I think maybe, to borrow from Frank, if they had called it something else, I think it could have been a lot more successful, and I think I would have bought into it more instead of setting the expectation of Point Break. Now, Chris, you were going back to horror. What is your horror remake that just did not only just a horror remake, but it's period one of the worst remakes?
Psycho 98, Gus Van Sant, completely pointless movie. It was so kind of give it a little bit of background. Like Gus Van Sant was like, he was coming off Good Will Hunting, right? So apparently he had always had this passion project of wanting to remake Psycho, and he wanted to do this like shot by shot remake of Psycho. And it's interesting. I remember when this movie came out, and the lead up to this movie, because it was like it was like a big horror film that was supposed to be coming out. It's like, oh, they're remaking Psycho. And the theory was like, it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be a shot by shot remake up until the shower scene. And then Gus is going to do his own thing with it. And then the movie came out, and is it quite literally a shot by shot remake? No, but it is about as close as you can possibly get. And there's just a lot of weird things that they decided to do with that movie where, okay, so they're going to do a shot by shot remake of Psycho, but they're going to have it take place in the modern day. Like, so it takes place in 98. Like, they even brought in the original screenwriter to, I guess, rewrite his own script, because they didn't, like, they changed some of the dialogue, but a lot of it is almost exactly the same as the original Psycho. And then just like kind of weird, like, things that they did, like Julianne Moore's character is walking around with a Walkman the entire time, which was just kind of weird. She's always has this Walkman on, which is, I don't know, it was kind of bizarre. And like some of the characters are like, you could clearly tell like William H. Macy is just basically trying to recreate like the detective character from the original one, but it doesn't fit because Julianne Moore's like, well, no, I'm going to do my own kind of thing here. And then like, there's just like a lot of weird shots of like people's bare asses. It's like the best way I can describe it. And it's like Vince Vaughn was just miscast as Norman. He really was like, at this point in his career, like Vince Vaughn was I wouldn't say he was a bad actor at that point, but you could tell he was definitely like still working at his craft. And now he's a phenomenal actor. But there was like a little time period when he was like first starting. It's like, oh man, I'm not too sure about this guy. And like, this was one of these movies, like, I just did not like him in this movie at all. And it was just utterly pointless. Like, they spent $60 million on this film for a guy to just basically do like an art house experiment of like, oh, can I like actually just recreate a film shot by shot? Like, even to the point where like Gus was watching like the DVD of Psycho while he was filming the movie and just like, nope, got to move the camera a little bit over here. We got to move this over here. And like, as an actor, like, how do you like get into the role? Really, it's like, oh, I guess I'm just redoing exactly what another actor had done. Like, it just didn't make sense. Like, and then even Gus Van Sant would say later, it's like, well, it was an experiment and it failed. Basically proved that you cannot just remake a film shot by shot. I have no idea why it cost $60 million to come to that conclusion, but you know, they made it. And I don't think I've ever met anybody who's actually defended the remake of Psycho. I'm sure there's probably people out there, which kind of happens. It's like, oh, it's like a film that was universally like trash when it came out. And there's always like, I don't know, a group of people like 20 years later. It's like, well, actually, it was actually pretty good. It's like, no. It was trash when it came out. Like, even the director can't defend it. You know, he said it, like, it didn't work. And that goes back to like kind of like when we did like the intro to this like two-parter. If you're gonna remake something, you got to bring something different to the table, and while still keeping like aspects of the original. And this, I don't know, it just failed at every step of the way at doing that. Like, I was just so disappointed when this film came out because I was like excited when it came out. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to watch this. And I'm like watching this and I'm like, oh, it's just really bad. It's really terrible. And I get it from Gus Van Sant's perspective to a degree. It's like, oh, this is like something that I always wanted to do. And it's like, you know, there's like certain points in like directors' careers where they're so high, like the studio is just like, you know what, just do whatever you want to do. It's going to be money. Gus is like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this shot by shot remake of Psycho. It's like something I always wanted to do. And he took his opportunity and did it, and it didn't work. And I always thought it was so weird because if you watch like a bunch of Van Sant's like other movies, why Psycho? Because I've never got any horror aspects or any of that type of stuff from any of his other movies, like Good Will Hunting and then like Elephant. I think he did Drugstore Cowboy. None of his movies have any kind of horror aspects to them at all. So why Psycho? I guess he just loved the film. Like, it's just bizarre. He's never even gone anywhere near the genre since. I mean, Elephant, I guess you can kind of say maybe there's aspects of horror to it because it deals with school shootings, but not really. If you watch the film, it's not horror film.
Now let's dive right into Chris's. We'll loop back around to that idea of the scene for scene remake. I think you really, to get to your point that that would be a really cool experiment, but a $60 million experiment to do something that's kind of an interesting lark. I mean, come on, let's get real. You got to bring something new to the table to make a feature film. There might be a point one day where major directors can do something like this to really push the envelope, but that wasn't the time or the place that you were going to be able to do that.
Oh no, I mean, like, he added some stuff. Like, there was, I don't know, some of the kill was a little bit bloodier. There's like that infamous scene of like Vince Vaughn like pleasuring himself. You don't actually see it, but like, you know, he's like searching through the people, and it was just like, I'm watching and he's just breaking out laughing because it was ridiculous. It just did not work. Like, even like that scene that's supposed to be kind of when you watch the first Psycho, it's like, yeah, people weren't, yeah, it's like, okay, it was olden times because it was like black and white. It's like people weren't like dumb. They knew what Bates was doing. You just didn't have to hear it or see it.
No, I saw a video recently on YouTube that mentioned, this movie, this remake, and the point that the video essayist was making, it was a larger video, but this just popped up. But his point was, why would I go watch that version if it's a shot for shot remake? Why wouldn't I just watch the original? I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand, unless it was like a shot for shot remake of a, 1922 film or something where the film quality was so much different and the set quality and all of the editing and everything was so radically different that you could do it shot for shot, but it would be a massive improvement. Maybe I could see that. But, I mean, let's face it. I mean, yeah, this was the 1950s and everything, but it's Alfred Hitchcock. It's a pretty masterfully made film. And so what are you gaining by doing a shot for shot remake? It just, I don't know.
You would really have to do something because the original was set in such a time and the place, and that was so important to it that it just didn't translate to 1999. I mean, for me to the one of the big aspects of is if you're staying in some Creepsville motel and you don't like it, you pick up your phone and go and Uber or do something to the next one. Like even you could do something similar to that in 1999. Like you weren't that dramatically torn away from society, where in the 1950s, like you stopped at one of these creep shack motels and there might not be another one of those. I mean, they were purposefully designed to be about a day's travel apart from each other. Mm-hmm. You drive through certain parts of the country and you can see, like if you're off of the highway and you go onto what would have been the major thoroughfare. I know that in New York, there was a lot of these. You drive and it was about a half of what have been back then, a good probably 4-hour drive. And then you'd hit some weird motel. That doesn't translate to 1999 or to the modern era. And then the black and white version. I mean, Hitchcock played with black and white so much, and I'm no film school student, but even somebody as obtuse as I can see what he was trying to do with black and white, and it was masterful. And to do that in 1990s color just isn't going to cut it.
That's another weird part about the film. It's like it's very bright when you're watching it. It's just odd color choices, or just a lot of really bright colors, and just didn't make any sense. Like, you're going to do a shot by shot remake, but it's going to take place in the modern era. It's like, well, if you're going to do it, then just do it at the time that the film was taking place then. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It's like, it almost seems like Gus was just like trolling Hollywood. It's like, oh, you think I'm like going to be like this big time like Hollywood director type? It's like, oh yeah, give me a bunch of money and this is what I'm going to make for you type thing. Because he came out of like that whole like indie scene with like him and Steven Soderbergh, and there was like a couple other guys. Steven Soderbergh, he's a hit and miss director. Some of his stuff's pretty good, some of it's not so good. Gus Van Sant's one of those guys in my opinion too. Like Good Will Hunting's a phenomenal film. It really is. It's one of the better films of the 90s.
Partially because of the phenomenal script and great acting, though.
Yeah.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. So I guess we'll jump to mine. Is my love of Point Break, the original one, is that just a matter of nostalgia and my youth, or was that not just one of the best freaking movies of all time?
I don't know if it was the best movie of all time, but it was a great action movie for the, when did it come out? Early 90s?
Yeah, 91.
Yeah. I think every point you made was bang on. I didn't finish watching the remake. It was that ridiculous and that implausible, and that, in the notes you described it as soulless. And I think that really, really captured it. The original character, the Johnny Utah character, it makes sense that he's became an FBI agent, and why these guys are doing these robberies makes sense. It was all like grounded. And it's like in this remake, they decided they had to go do some weird, like spiritual journey stuff that doesn't work and completely takes away from him, from the whole process. I couldn't even finish it. And I really, really enjoyed the original. I mean, it's not one of my favorite movies. I wouldn't put it, it's not like in the top 10 even for the 90s, but it's a 2 thumbs up, I mean, I remember the fight scene that they had was very realistic. It wasn't over the top Hollywood. A few blows and people were knocked down and hurting, and very realistic. And the conflict between anytime you have an undercover story, there's always the dances with wolves factor coming into play. Will they, how? I mean, look, we talked about Donnie Brasco more than once on this program and on the Organized Crime and Punishment as well. I mean, he was sympathetic to Lucky and to a couple of the other people that he was ostensibly there to take down, right? And you get a little hint of that from Keanu Reeves, especially regarding Bodhi, regarding Patrick Swayze. And I believed Patrick Swayze in that movie. I believed he was that character. And I mean, even more than I believed Johnny Utah, which I thought Reeves did a good job in that role. But I totally believed that Bodhi was exactly who Bodhi was presenting himself as. And I mean, I couldn't even tell who the heck he was supposed to be in the sequel. It was just redonkulous.
Yeah, one of the things that they had that metaphor, and they'd started it early about following your line. And I guess line is like in extreme sports, it's like your path that you're going to take, like when you're skiing, so that you don't fall off of a cliff or, whatever. Or
interfere with somebody else, that doing it as well.
And at the very last extreme thing where they're going to free climb the, Angel Falls, I think it was, in Venezuela. So another spectacular locale. One of the other members of the gang Bodhi says, that's the perfect line. That's where we're going to take. And the guy says, that's your line, Bodhi. That's not my line. And that was like the one true moment in the whole movie. And they didn't try to do that in any other part of the movie. That was like the one time in the whole thing that I felt connected to the characters. And then you felt the connection that he was going to follow Bodhi's line, even though it wasn't his line. And even though he knew it was going to ultimately lead to his death, he still did it. All right. So that you can give it a little bit of credit, but why didn't they do that early in the movie and give us that?
That's just maddening, because what you're talking about there is that was a glimpse of the potential of what the movie could have maybe been. And that's probably the idea that some initial writer had. And then I guarantee you this movie was destroyed by committee. I'm going to go look it up while we're talking. I'll bet you there's more than one writer on this movie. And even if there isn't, there's producers and directors messing up the vision, because if that was the vision, if that kind of conflict and that kind of, you can do a lot with that. And they didn't, they absolutely just didn't.
What did you think, Chris?
I really like the original one. I think the original one's fantastic. I didn't even know they had remade the movie. I remember you, Steve, mentioning it to me. I'm like, what? They remade this movie? And
in 2015. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier or not. So it's going on 10 years now.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, you said it was so terrible. I didn't even bother watching it, just because I love the original one so much. It's a fantastic action film, right? And I'm trying to remember her name right now. The director, Catherine
Bigelow.
Yes, and she also did Hurt Locker. She also directed one of my favorite. Well, it is my favorite vampire movie, Near Dark, with Bill Paxton, and that's a she's a phenomenal director. She's like kind of one of those like under the radar type directors. She also directed Strange Days, which everything that she's ever done, I've always really enjoyed. She was married to James Cameron at one point, but James Cameron's had like 7 wives or something like that. I remember looking up his Wikipedia page. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's been married a lot. But I love the original. I think it's one of Keanu Reeves' best movies.
Just for clarification, writing credits according to IMDb has Kurt Wimmer as writing the screenplay, story by Rick King and ampersand Peter Iliff and the word and Kurt Wimmer. So I think when there's an ampersand dividing them, that means that they both wrote it, but they didn't work together. And if it says and, the word and, that means they worked together on the script. So I interpret this as Rick King wrote or came up with the story, and then Peter Iliff and Kurt Wimmer did some more on it. Iliff was the guy who wrote the original Point Break screenplay, and he and Rick King did the original Point Break story. So it's kind of interesting that the two who worked together, I'm going to have to double check that. Maybe I got my ands backwards, but when you see 3 people, it's, 2 people you can kind of cock your eyebrow a little bit. When you start to see 3 people, I mean, it's not a television series where there's a writer's room. A movie needs to be far more concise and far more unified in its writing. And when you see more writers, you see sometimes the more problems there were during production. And in this case, I think it came out on the screen despite
that choppiness factor.
Yeah. And as far as Catherine Bigelow goes, yeah, she's done some great stuff. I thought The Hurt Locker was great, and some of the other stuff you mentioned was great. I don't know if she's the problem here or not. The movie sucks. It flat out sucks. And so the director has to take some responsibility there, whether she's dealing with a dog's breakfast of a script or not, and maybe some underperforming actors, hey, I'll take that argument. But she has to bear some of the responsibility too, as the director. And the director in all 3 of these movies we talked about, Gus Van Sant, and then whoever directed.
Well, I got to cut you off there, Frank, because I don't know who directed the remake. I know she directed the original, so we can't be throwing her under the bus.
Oh, okay. Then just cut that out, Steve. Just cut all that out. That rant. Let me redo that rant for you, and you can pick me up and do it. So. So Catherine Bigelow did the original, the direct. I don't know who directed. I can find out who directed it. Erickson Core directed this one. I've never heard of him. I don't know what else he's done. I think anytime a movie is great, a director is part of the reason why. And I think anytime a movie sucks, the director is part of the reason why. It's such a pivotal role. It's like the goalie in hockey, the pitcher in baseball, quarterback in football. If the team loses, usually they bear some responsibility. And so, maybe he was dealing with a lousy script or a dog's breakfast, mix of mixed up, tangle of words, and it wasn't any good. Maybe the actors let him down, but he bears some responsibility there.
Now we're going to mention Kurt Wimmer. Sorry, he directed Equilibrium. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that film with Christian Bale. It's Maybe. Like a sci-fi dystopian like kung fu movie, but with like guns instead of swords. It's actually really well done. He also did that Eon Flux movie too, which I thought was. Oh, no, it wasn't Eon Flux. I'm getting it mixed up with something else. But Equilibrium is definitely worth checking out. I just thought I would add that just in case people listen to this and they think, oh, Kurt Wimmer. It's like, oh, he directed one of the worst remakes. Like, he helped write one of the worst remakes of all time. It's like, no, it's not all bad. He's done some good stuff.
So now let's move on. We're kind of going to maybe the next level of hell, and that is the Total Recall remake. And
oh my God.
I think I mean, I don't even know what to say. Chris, why don't you get us started with this? Because, I mean, as bad as Point Break was, I think that Frank has us all beat. And as bad as the Psycho remake was, this Total Recall remake was something else. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, it's just pointless. And Frank mentioned earlier, it really kind of sums it up as it just felt corporate. Like, it's just soulless. Like, there was really no reason to make this film. You could tell that Colin Farrell wasn't really all that interested in doing it. I think this was at this point where to be honest with you, I think Colin Farrell was dealing with substance abuse problems at this time. And he was just he had like a string of like really bad movies where it just seemed like he was just cashing checks. And he's gotten better now. And, you know, you can see with the quality of projects that he's working on. And I'm happy that he's healthier now. But I'm pretty sure this was like right around that time where it was just, what are you doing, Colin? Like, you're a phenomenal actor. Like, why are you doing this stuff? And it's like, oh, he's just cashing checks. I'm quite happy that this film was not very well received, because I remember there was a lot of rumors at the time that they were going to remake Starship Troopers, which was another Paul Verhoeven directed film, and it never came about. It's like, so thank God they never touched that. But I remember when this came out, that was like, oh, if this does really good, it's like, oh, we're going to remake Starship Troopers too. So it's like, I'm happy that it did not do well.
Yeah, I mean, really, to your point, it was a remake that missed on every single point. I think that that's sort of the theme that cuts through all of our remakes, is that every single place where it could have maybe done a homage to the first one, or maybe did something a little better, or did something a little differently, it just didn't do any of them. It told an entirely different story that was kind of connected, but not really. And it just bombed out and at every single turn.
Yeah. And I mean, I was a little bit harsh when I said, the only thing people would remember was the head scrambler machine. I mean, he goes to recall and he does want a memory implanted and all of that. So that small little fragment of the core of the movie is from the original is still there, but that's it. That's it. That really is like that moment that you talked about where the guy said, that's our line. And no, that's not my line, buddy. That was like, glimmer of what could have been. And this was the only real glimmer of the original, was that very small piece of the premise. And, I don't know anything about Colin Farrell's, drug problems, but, he's been really good in he was great in this second season of True Detective, for instance. But he was pretty mediocre in this one, he was in Minority Report, another Philip K. Dick adaptation, and I thought he was pretty good. It was a Tom Cruise movie, so he wasn't going to upstage Tom Cruise, but I still thought he held his own, and he was a good antagonist for Cruise to be measured against. Here, he just didn't seem to have it, and there really wasn't a great antagonist either. I mean, Bryan Cranston obviously was great in Breaking Bad, but he was nothing special in this movie either. But I think I was going to pick anything. I think that the script just was horrible. I think this is one where they could have stayed a little closer to the actual first movie, and had him go to Mars and had it. There's a lot of things they could have changed and put their own spin on. But I think that the actual story was a very compelling one, and I think it's why people still like it. Although apparently not as much as I think. I was looking on IMDb, and the original 1987 one is rated at 7.5, which is a pretty respectable rating. But the sequel, or the remake rather, is like 6.2. I'm like, are you kidding me? More like 2.6.
One thread
when I
that
was doing. Sorry, Steve.
One thread that connects the Total Recall remake and the Point Break is that they were both written by Kurt Wimmer.
Oh, really?
I mean, Kurt has written a couple of other remakes, so maybe he's the remake go-to guy. And I can say from some of his other, The Children of the Corn, I think I may have seen that, but I don't remember it. And then he wrote not quite the sequel, or not quite a remake, but a sequel of The Expendables, which I did not go out of my way to see Expendables 4. And he also did write The Beekeeper, which, I mean, The Beekeeper was kind of a fun movie, but it was not a piece of high art by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, neither was the original, Total Recall. I think we can all agree. But
yeah,
it captured a combination of great action, a little bit of campy fun, a compelling mystery, high stakes. I mean, it was a thriller before thrillers were, the thing. I mean, it fits the classification. And it found a way to kind of balance all of those things in equal parts, or in the correct proportions anyway, to be successful. And while I think that the 2012 version has a grittier edge to it, doesn't have quite as much of the humor, obviously, and everything. It doesn't, it's a very one note. It's very, monosyllabic, I guess, if that makes sense. And so, it was a pretty easy choice. I think, I did watch the whole thing. I almost watched it again for this, show, but I couldn't bring myself to watch it again. And, your show, Steve, Point Break, I quit watching it, so which one sucks worse? I mean, the one you can't finish, I think, probably wins.
Well, when I was researching the Total Recall, David Cronenberg was tied to direct the what ended up becoming the Arnold version at one point, and he wanted to do. Him and the producer had like a falling out, or they had different vision of what they wanted out of the film, and the one we ended up getting that I think it was the producer wanted was much closer to like what we got with the Arnold one. David Cronenberg wanted to do a version of Total Recall that was much more in the style of Blade Runner. I kind of want to see that film. Like I would watch a David Cronenberg directed remake of Total Recall, where the tone is completely different. And I think that would have been interesting to see. Well, we're probably
there's a little bit of Cronenberg in the original, though. I mean, not specifically him, but I mean the Kuato and the other deformities. The actor that plays the brother-in-law, the DEA agent on Breaking Bad. Hank. That actor, he plays the guy with the twisted over face and everything. There's some great makeup in that original movie that some of it's very reminiscent of Cronenberg. At least Cronenberg light, anyway.
I think the big miss is the thing when it missed the expectation. The expectation is Total Recall. It's going to be on Mars. And when you cut that out, no Mars, I think what I honestly thought is that I like Colin Farrell. He's a great actor. He's different than Arnold. So you're going to get something a little different out of it. So you fulfill that different aspect. And then what I was really expecting was even better 2012 production values, better CGI, better computer graphics and that sort of thing. And you really didn't get that in the package you got. And you certainly I didn't get the expectation that I expected, because that was when some of the prequels of Star Wars came out that were really really well done. Sci-fi, and then you just get something, like you said, Frank, flat.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's a missed opportunity, I think, too, Steve. You do have an A-list actor You've got the money. Actually, you've got more than one A-list actor there. Cranston, and then Kate Beckinsale, and then Jessica Biel was in it as well. Could have been something fantastic, and they just, if you're going to do that again, make your own movie. Like, just make your own sci-fi, and it might have been an okay sci-fi movie if they hadn't tried to shoehorn in stuff that had nothing to do with it. I mean, that was one of my objections to the 4th season of True Detective, was it had zero connection whatsoever, but they tried to make connections to the first season, and it was all shoehorned in, and it was all ridiculous fan service. And I still think it was a steaming pile of a season anyway, but it might have been mildly entertaining if it hadn't come with the expectation of being a True Detective season, and B, being related back to aspects of the first season. And I think if you're going to do things like that, if you're going to call it Total Recall, like you said, it's got to not just be on Mars. It's got to be frenetic. It's got to be inventive. It's got to be mysterious. It's got to be a little bit funny. Doesn't have, you could make it a little more serious, but you still got to have a quip or two. And, I mean, I think they did like one callback where somebody made a joke about going to Mars, and that was it, and it just, and it fell flat. And that's really what the whole movie did. So, I think if I was voting, I'd still vote for Total Recall, even though I was able to sit through it. I think the reason I was able to sit through it was I kept hoping it would save itself before the end of the movie. Whereas with Point Break, I just knew this movie was going to suck all the way to the end. So I bailed.
Well, I think we're going to leave it at that for today's episode on Worst Remakes. We definitely want to hear what your thoughts are on our least favorite remakes, and then what remakes do you think didn't hit? Share them on Facebook, share them in the comments on YouTube, like and subscribe on YouTube, and we will talk to you next time.
Yep. See you later, guys.
Thanks.